October 12th, 1944. E0847 hours, Kummersdorf, proving ground, 40 kilometers south of Berlin. Obergefreiter Klaus Dietrich walked across the muddy test range toward the wooden table where 5 rifles lay waiting. 4 were familiar. The Karabiner 98K that he'd carried through Poland, France, and now the Western Front, a Soviet Mosin Nagant captured at Kursk, a British Lee Enfield taken at Dunkirk, an Italian Carcano, largely useless. But the 5th rifle was different. It sat there with a polished walnut stock, a distinctive en-bloc clip system, and a reputation that had spread through the Wehrmacht like wildfire. The M1 Garand, 8 rounds, semi-automatic, the rifle that American infantry carried by the millions. Dietrich had been ordered to test it, to fire it, to document its performance against the Kar98k, to provide data that German ordnance officers could use to assess the threat. What Dietrich didn't know was that within 3 hours his report would confirm what German commanders had been denying for 2 years. The Americans had given their infantry a technological advantage that couldn't be overcome by training, tactics, or courage, and that advantage was measured not in accuracy or range, but in something far more decisive. Rate of fire. The problem had started in Normandy. German infantry positions that should have held for hours collapsed in minutes when attacked by American rifle squads. Machine gun nests that should have pinned down entire platoons were overrun by small groups of GIs firing at a rate that seemed impossible. Wehrmacht, after-action reports from June and July of 1944 described American rifle fire as continuous, unrelenting, like multiple machine guns. German officers assumed the Americans were using submachine guns or automatic rifles exclusively. They weren't. They were using the M1 Garand, a semi-automatic rifle that fired as fast as you could pull the trigger and held 8 rounds instead of 5. By October of 1944, enough Garands had been captured that German ordnance finally authorized comprehensive testing. Kummersdorf, proving ground, had been the German military's primary weapons testing facility since 1875. Every rifle, every artillery piece, every tank that entered German service had been tested there. The facility had firing ranges extending over 5 kilometers, ballistic laboratories, and a staff of expert marksmen who could evaluate any weapon under controlled conditions. Dietrich was one of those marksmen. 32 years old, trained as a precision shooter before the war, assigned to the infantry when Germany invaded Poland in 1939. He'd fought on the Eastern Front from 1941 to 1943, then transferred west after being wounded at Kharkov. By late 1944, his combat experience and marksmanship skills made him valuable for testing captured weapons. He'd fired hundreds of rifles, pistols and machine guns, British, Soviet, American, French. He could pick up an unfamiliar weapon, understand its mechanism in minutes, and produce an accurate assessment of its capabilities. He'd never crashed, meaning failed to fire, a single weapon in his entire testing career, even when working with damaged or poorly maintained captured equipment. When the M1 Garand arrived at Kummersdorf on October 10th, Dietrich was told to have a complete evaluation, ready within 3 days. That was unusually fast. Normally, captured weapons sat for weeks while armorers disassembled every component, measured tolerances, analyzed metallurgy, and documented manufacturing techniques. But the Wehrmacht was desperate for information about the Garand. The rifle had appeared in American hands in significant numbers starting in 1943, though it had been adopted by the US military back in 1936. Before Normandy, most German soldiers had never encountered it. The Wehrmacht's intelligence assessments of American infantry weapons had focused on the M1903 Springfield bolt-action rifle and the M1 carbine. The Garand was mentioned, but not emphasized. Then, D-Day happened. Suddenly, American infantry, equipped almost entirely with semi-automatic rifles, were assaulting German positions with a volume of fire that German defenders couldn't match. Machine gunners who engaged American squads found themselves suppressed by return fire that sounded like multiple automatic weapons. German riflemen who had trained their entire careers with bolt-action rifles discovered they were outgunned by ordinary American infantry. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you're watching from today. In 6 weeks of fighting in Normandy, German infantry units suffered casualty rates that exceeded anything they'd experienced on the Eastern Front. Part of that was Allied air superiority, part was artillery, but a significant portion was small arms fire. American rifle squads were killing German soldiers at ranges and rates that didn't match pre-war assessments. That's why Dietrich was given only 3 days to prepare his evaluation. German commanders needed answers. The armourers at Kummersdorf worked methodically. They'd received 3 M1 Garands from different capture sources, one from the 1st Infantry Division, taken at Omaha Beach, one from the 29th Infantry Division, captured near St. Lo, one from the 82nd Airborne, recovered after Market Garden. All 3 were in good condition, well maintained, functional. The armourers disassembled each rifle completely, examined every part, took measurements, made technical drawings. They noted the quality of manufacturing. The steel was excellent, properly heat-treated, precisely machined. The wood stocks were well fitted, finished with linseed oil. The gas system was ingenious, using propellant gases to cycle the action automatically. They test-fired each rifle for function. All 3 worked perfectly. They painted small identification marks on each weapon. They prepared ammunition, 8-round en-bloc clips loaded with US-made .30-06 cartridges from captured stocks. By the morning of October 12th, the rifles were ready. Dietrich walked out to the test range at around 8:30 hours. He'd reviewed every piece of information the Wehrmacht had on the M1 Garand. Technical drawings captured from American supply depots, intelligence reports from prisoners of war, performance estimates based on combat observations. But all of that was second-hand information. Dietrich was about to get first-hand data. He was about to find out if the M1 Garand was really as effective as American infantry claimed, or if it was just another overhyped weapon that looked better in propaganda than in actual use. The walk-around inspection took 15 minutes. The Garand was heavier than the Kar98k, approximately 4.3 kilograms compared to 4 kilograms for the German rifle. The extra weight was noticeable, but not excessive. The overall length was similar, 110 centimeters for the Garand versus 111 centimeters for the Kar98k. The barrel length was shorter on the Garand, 61 centimeters compared to 74 centimeters on the German rifle. That suggested slightly lower muzzle velocity, but not enough to matter at infantry combat ranges. The action was completely different. The Kar98k used a manually operated bolt of 5 rounds loaded into an internal magazine from a stripper clip. After each shot, the soldier had to lift the bolt, pull it back, push it forward, and lock it down before firing again. Experienced soldiers could do this quickly, but it still took time. The Garand used a semi-automatic gas-operated system. 8 rounds loaded in an en-bloc clip that inserted from the top. After each shot, gas pressure from the fired cartridge cycled the action automatically, ejecting the spent case and chambering a new round. The shooter only had to pull the trigger again. No manual cycling required. When the 8th round was fired, the empty clip ejected automatically with a distinctive ping sound, and the bolt locked open, ready for a fresh clip. Dietrich picked up the Garand. The balance felt good, despite the extra weight. The stock fit naturally to his shoulder. The sights were different from German sights, but clear and easy to use. Rear aperture sight, front post, simple and effective. The trigger had a short take-up, then a clean break. Estimated pull weight around 2.3 kilograms, heavier than a target rifle, but appropriate for a military weapon. He examined the safety mechanism. A lever inside the trigger guard. Push forward to safe. Pull back to fire. Intuitive. He located the magazine release. A button on the right side of the receiver. Press it, and the N-block clip would eject even if rounds remained. That was useful for administrative unloading. He checked the action. Smooth, well-fitted, tight tolerances. American manufacturing quality was evident in every detail. Dietrich knew American industry was massive, but he'd assumed that mass production meant lower quality. The Garand proved that assumption wrong. This was a precision instrument built to exacting standards and produced by the millions. At AU-847, Dietrich signaled the range officer. The test would proceed in stages. First, basic function, then accuracy at various ranges, then rate of fire compared to the Kar-98k, finally endurance testing, to see if the mechanism would fail under sustained use. The range officer handed Dietrich an en-bloc clip loaded with 8 rounds of .30-06 ammunition. Dietrich examined the clip. It was a simple, stamped steel device that held the cartridges in 2 staggered columns. The entire clip inserted into the rifle from the top, pushing down against spring pressure until it locked into place. With a solid click, he inserted the clip into the Garand. The action closed automatically, chambering the first round. The rifle was ready to fire. No additional manipulation required. He raised the Garand to his shoulder, aimed at a target 50 meters downrange, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired. The recoil was mild, comparable to the Kar-98k. The report was sharp, but not excessive. The action cycled instantly. Before Dietrich could process what had happened, the rifle was ready to fire again. He squeezed the trigger a second time. Another round fired. The action cycled. Ready again. He continued. Third shot, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. The entire clip of 8 rounds was fired in approximately 4 seconds. The empty clip ejected with that distinctive metallic ping. The bolt locked open. Dietrich lowered the rifle and looked at the target. 8 holes, grouped within a 20-centimeter circle at 50 meters. Acceptable accuracy for a combat rifle. But what struck him wasn't the accuracy. It was the speed. He'd just fired 8 aimed shots in 4 seconds. With a Kar-98k, firing 8 shots required loading 2 stripper clips and manually cycling the bolt 8 times. Even an experienced rifleman needed at least 20 seconds. The Garand did it in 4. He walked to the table where the Kar-98k sat and picked it up. He loaded a 5-round stripper clip, cycled the bolt, and fired 5 rounds at the same target. Each shot required him to work the bolt. Lift, pull, push, close, aim, fire. Lift, pull, push, close, aim, fire. The process was mechanical, ingrained from thousands of repetitions, but it was slow. 5 rounds took him 12 seconds. Dietrich set down the Kar-98k and made notes on his evaluation sheet. Rate of fire, practical. M1 Garand, 8 rounds in 4 seconds. Kar-98k, 5 rounds in 12 seconds. The Garand fired twice as many rounds in 1/3 the time. The disparity was even worse than he'd expected. The range officer approached. Continue with accuracy testing at 100 meters. Dietrich nodded. He picked up the Garand, loaded a fresh clip, and moved to a firing position, facing a target 100 meters downrange. He aimed carefully and fired 8 rounds, taking his time between shots to ensure proper sight alignment. The group measured approximately 15 centimeters. Excellent accuracy. He repeated the test with the Kar-98k. 8 rounds required 2 full magazines, 16 separate bolt manipulations. The group measured approximately 12 centimeters. Slightly better accuracy than the Garand, but not significantly. At 200 meters, the results were similar. The Kar-98k produced marginally tighter groups, but the difference was perhaps 3 centimeters. At combat ranges, that margin was irrelevant. Dietrich noted the findings. Accuracy, comparable. The Kar-98k's longer barrel and bolt action design provided slightly better precision, but the advantage was marginal. In combat, where targets moved and soldiers fired under stress, that advantage would disappear entirely. The next test was more revealing. Dietrich was ordered to simulate combat conditions, engage multiple targets in rapid succession. The scenario was realistic: 5 man-sized targets At ranges between 50 and 150 meters, engage all 5 as quickly as possible with accurate fire. Dietrich started with the Kar98k. He loaded 5 rounds, took a shooting position, and began engaging targets. First target, 50 meters. Aim, fire, cycle bolt. Second target, 75 meters. Aim, fire, cycle bolt. Third target, 100 meters. Aim, fire, cycle bolt. Fourth target, 125 meters. Aim, fire, cycle bolt. Fifth target, 150 meters. Aim, fire, bolt, locked open, magazine empty. Total time, 18 seconds. He reloaded with a fresh stripper clip, chambered a round, and prepared to engage again. Total reload time, 4 seconds. Then he switched to the M1 Garand. He loaded an 8-round clip and took position. First target, aim, fire, no action required. The rifle cycled itself. Second target, aim, fire, instant. Third target, aim, fire. Fourth target, aim, fire. Fifth target, aim, fire. Total time, 8 seconds. 3 rounds remained in the magazine. He could engage 3 more targets without reloading. The difference was staggering. The Garand allowed him to engage 5 targets in less than half the time required by the Kar98k, and he still had ammunition ready. Dietrich lowered the rifle and spoke to the range officer. The rate of fire advantage is decisive. In any engagement involving multiple targets, the Garand user wins. The range officer made notes, but said nothing. The test continued. Next was sustained fire. How many rounds could each rifle fire in 1 minute? Dietrich started with the Kar98k. He had a stack of preloaded stripper clips on the table beside him. He would fire until the minute was up, reloading as quickly as possible. The range officer started his stopwatch. Dietrich began. Fire 5 rounds. Eject the magazine follower. Insert a fresh stripper clip. Strip the rounds down into the magazine. Close the bolt. Fire 5 more rounds. Repeat. His hands moved automatically. Load, fire, load, fire. Experienced soldiers could achieve 15 to 20 rounds per minute with a Kar98k under ideal conditions. In combat, that number dropped to perhaps 10 rounds per minute. After 1 minute, the stopwatch clicked. Dietrich had fired 35 rounds, 7 full magazines. That was exceptional, faster than most soldiers could manage, but it required constant manual manipulation. His hands ached from cycling the bolt. Now the Garand. Dietrich had a stack of preloaded en-bloc clips, 8 rounds per clip. The range officer reset the stopwatch. Dietrich loaded the first clip. The action closed. He began firing, 8 rounds in approximately 4 seconds. The clip ejected. He grabbed another clip from the table, inserted it without looking, and continued firing. 8 more rounds. Clip ejected, another clip loaded. Fire. The rhythm was mechanical. Load. Fire 8. Load. Fire 8. No bolt to cycle. No manual operation, except pulling the trigger and inserting fresh clips. After 1 minute, Dietrich had fired 96 rounds, 12 full clips. Nearly 3 times the volume of fire compared to the Kar98k. The range officer stopped the test. He walked to Dietrich and examined the Garand. Any malfunctions? None. Any difficulty with the mechanism? None. It functions perfectly. The range officer made extensive notes. This data would be included in the final report. The Wehrmacht needed to understand exactly what they were facing. The final test was endurance. How many rounds could the Garand fire before something broke? Dietrich spent the next hour firing the rifle continuously. He went through clip after clip, pausing only to let the barrel cool slightly when it became too hot to touch. At 200 rounds, the rifle was still functioning perfectly. At 400 rounds, no issues. At 600 rounds, one of the armorers approached with a cleaning kit. "We should clean it. The gas system may foul." They disassembled the gas cylinder and piston. There was carbon buildup, but nothing excessive. They cleaned the parts, reassembled the rifle, and continued testing. At 800 rounds, the rifle was still firing flawlessly. Dietrich finally stopped at 1,000 rounds. His shoulder was sore from recoil, his hands were dirty from handling ammunition, but the Garand showed no signs of mechanical failure. The armourers disassembled it again and examined every part. The barrel showed normal wear. The gas system had carbon deposits, but nothing that affected function. The trigger mechanism was still crisp. The action was still smooth. The rifle had fired 1,000 rounds in a single session and remained fully operational. One of the armourers, an older man named Schmidt, who had worked at Kummersdorf since the 1920s, shook his head slowly. American manufacturing. That was all he said, but Dietrich understood. The Germans could build precision weapons. The Kar-98k was proof of that. But the Americans could build precision weapons at a scale that Germany couldn't match, and those weapons were designed for sustained use under conditions that would destroy less robust designs. Dietrich spent the next 2 days writing his report. He documented every test, every measurement, every observation. The report was typed, classified, and distributed to Wehrmacht ordnance offices. One copy went to infantry units on the Western Front. The message was clear, but unspoken in official language. The M1 Garand was the most effective infantry rifle in the war. Do not assume your Kar-98k was equivalent. The Garand could fire faster, reload faster, and sustain higher volumes of fire. The only advantages the Kar-98k had were slightly better accuracy at long range and simpler manual operation. But in close combat, where most infantry engagements occurred, those advantages were meaningless. The Garand's rate of fire was decisive. Dietrich's report included tactical recommendations. German infantry should avoid prolonged firefights with American rifle squads, use machine guns to suppress, use grenades to assault, use terrain to close distance quickly. Do not engage in extended shooting matches at 50 to 100 meters. The Americans would win through volume of fire. These recommendations were based on cold, technical analysis, but they reflected a broader problem the Wehrmacht faced by late 1944. For years, German infantry had been told their equipment was the best in the world. The Kar-98k was a superb rifle, accurate, reliable, well-made. German soldiers were trained to use it effectively, but by 1944, the Americans had fielded something better, and they'd fielded it by the millions. The psychological impact was as important as the technical performance. German soldiers who'd spent years believing in their equipment's superiority suddenly found themselves outgunned. American infantry, who should have been pinned down by German rifle fire, kept advancing, laying down suppressive fire that forced German soldiers to stay in cover. Wehrmacht, after-action reports from late 1944, described a shift in infantry combat dynamics. German squads that had controlled engagements earlier in the war were now reacting to American initiative. American rifle squads could advance under their own covering fire, something German squads couldn't do effectively with bolt-action rifles. One dramatic example came from the Battle of Hürtgen Forest in November of 1944. German infantry positions in dense woodland should have been ideal defensive terrain. Short ranges, heavy cover, limited visibility, conditions that favored prepared defenders, but American rifle squads, equipped with Garands, moved through the forest aggressively, suppressing German positions with rapid fire, closing distance quickly, and overrunning positions before German defenders could react. A German infantry company commander, Hauptmann Ernst Bauer, wrote in his after-action report, "American infantry advances with continuous rifle fire that sounds like machine guns. Our riflemen cannot return equivalent fire. They expend 5 rounds, must reload, and by then the Americans have closed another 20 meters. We require machine gun support for every engagement, but machine guns draw artillery fire." If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Bauer's report was one of dozens describing the same problem. The M1 Garand had changed infantry combat in ways that training and tactics couldn't fully counter. But the Garand's impact went beyond rate of fire. It represented something larger. American industrial capacity. The rifle wasn't just effective. It was everywhere. By late 1944, nearly every American infantryman in Europe carried one. Over 4 million M1 Garands were produced during the war, mostly at Springfield Armory in Massachusetts and Winchester Repeating Arms in Connecticut. Production rates exceeded 40,000 rifles per month by 1943. The Americans could afford to lose Garands and replace them within weeks. Germany couldn't afford to lose experienced soldiers. The M1 Garand's origins made its success even more remarkable. It was designed by a Canadian-born engineer named Kar98k's Garand, who worked at Springfield Armory. Garand had started developing semi-automatic rifle designs in the early 1920s. The U.S. military had been searching for a semi-automatic rifle since World War I, recognizing that rate of fire was critical in modern infantry combat. Garand's early designs used primer-actuated systems that proved unreliable. He switched to gas operation in the late 1920s, developing a system where propellant gases were tapped from the barrel and used to cycle the action. His design competed against other systems, including one by John Pedersen. But Garand's proved more reliable and simpler to manufacture. In 1936, the U.S. Army officially adopted the M1 Garand as its standard service rifle, replacing the bolt-action M1903 Springfield. That decision was controversial. Many senior officers believed semi-automatic rifles were too complex, too fragile, would jam in field conditions, and would encourage soldiers to waste ammunition. They argued that bolt-action rifles enforced fire discipline. But testing proved the Garand was reliable, and tactical analysis showed that increased rate of fire was more valuable than enforced discipline. The U.S. military committed to the Garand, and by 1941, production was ramping up rapidly. When the United States entered World War II, in December 1941, the M1 Garand was already in service. American infantry training emphasized the rifle's capabilities. Soldiers were taught to fire rapidly, use covering fire, advance under their own suppression. Tactics were built around the rifle's strengths. By 1943, American infantry doctrine was completely integrated with the Garand's capabilities. The results in combat were undeniable. German intelligence reports from late 1942 through 1943 noted American infantry's high rate of fire, but attributed it to submachine guns and automatic rifles. The Wehrmacht didn't fully grasp that ordinary American riflemen were using semi-automatic weapons until Normandy. By then, it was too late to develop an equivalent. Germany had experimented with semi-automatic rifles. The Gewehr 41, introduced in 1941, was semi-automatic, but plagued with reliability problems. The Gewehr 43, an improved version introduced in 1943, was better, but still not as reliable as the Garand. More critically, Germany couldn't produce semi-automatic rifles in the numbers required to re-equip the entire infantry. By late 1944, perhaps 100,000 Gewehr 43s had been manufactured, compared to over 4 million Garands. The production disparity reflected broader industrial differences. The United States had effectively unlimited manufacturing capacity, access to raw materials, and no threat of strategic bombing. Germany was fighting a multi-front war, facing strategic bombing that destroyed factories, suffering resource shortages, and unable to concentrate production. The result was predictable. American infantry was equipped with modern semi-automatic rifles by the millions. German infantry remained equipped with bolt-action rifles that, while excellent, were technologically a generation behind. Klaus Dietrich's report on the M1 Garand was one of the most widely distributed weapons evaluations of the war. Copies reached infantry divisions on both the Western and Eastern fronts. Training units received copies. Officer schools received copies. The report was detailed, technical, and brutally honest. It did not sugarcoat the Garand's performance. It did not claim German superiority out of propaganda necessity. It simply stated the facts. The M1 Garand was a superior infantry rifle. It had exceptional rate of fire. It had adequate accuracy. It was reliable under sustained use. It was well manufactured, and most importantly, it was being produced in massive numbers. The Americans could afford to equip every infantryman with a semi-automatic rifle. Germany could not. By early 1945, the Wehrmacht was running out of experienced infantry faster than training depots could produce replacements. Young soldiers with minimal training were being thrown into combat against American units equipped with Garands, supported by overwhelming artillery, backed by complete air superiority. The result was predictable. German soldiers died. American forces advanced. One of the most revealing documents from this period came in March of 1945. American intelligence officers began interrogating captured German soldiers, asking them about American weapons. 38 captured Wehrmacht infantrymen, many of them experienced veterans, were interviewed. The interrogations were compiled into a classified document titled Enemy Assessment of Allied Infantry Weapons, dated March 28, 1945. The section on the M1 Garand contained detailed opinions from men who had fought against it. The results were unambiguous. The captured German soldiers rated the M1 Garand as the most effective infantry rifle in the war. They respected its rate of fire, reliability, and the tactical advantage it gave American infantry. Some admitted they would avoid engaging American rifle squads at close range because the volume of fire was overwhelming. Others said that only German machine gunners could effectively suppress American riflemen because German bolt-action rifles couldn't match the Garand's sustained fire. One experienced Unteroffizier was quoted as saying, "The American rifle fires faster than we can work our bolts. In a firefight, they shoot 3 times for every one of our shots. You cannot win that fight." The Wehrmacht had spent 3 years developing tactics to fight against superior Allied artillery and air power. Those tactics involved dispersal, camouflage, rapid movement, and using terrain for protection. But there were no effective tactics against an enemy whose ordinary infantry could fire 3 times faster. The M1 Garand's strategic impact extended beyond individual firefights. It changed how American infantry operated at the tactical level. American squads could advance with fewer heavy weapons because their riflemen provided sufficient suppressive fire. That made American units more mobile, more aggressive, and harder to pin down. German defenders, who had successfully used terrain and fortifications earlier in the war, found those advantages negated by the sheer volume of fire American rifle squads could generate. In the Battle of the Bulge, December 1944 through January 1945, German offensive operations initially succeeded through surprise and overwhelming force. But as American units recovered and counterattacked, German infantry discovered they couldn't hold captured positions against American rifle squads advancing with continuous suppressive fire. One German battalion commander reported that his positions were overrun not by armor or artillery, but by American infantry, laying down fire that sounded like dozens of machine guns. In reality, it was rifle squads equipped with Garands, firing as fast as they could pull their triggers. Klaus Dietrich survived the war. He was captured by American forces in April of 1945 when Kummersdorf was overrun. His expertise was immediately recognized. The U.S. Army recruited him to evaluate captured German weapons, the reverse of his wartime role. After the war, Dietrich returned to civilian life in Germany, working as a gunsmith and occasionally writing about weapons testing. In 1962, he published an article in a German military history journal about testing Allied weapons during the war. The section on the M1 Garand was remarkably candid. He described the rifle as the most significant infantry weapon advancement of the war and noted that its impact on combat was greater than most people understood. He wrote, "The Garand gave American infantry a decisive advantage in rate of fire. That advantage translated to control of engagements. German soldiers with excellent training and good rifles were simply outgunned." Dietrich never saw the Garand as an enemy weapon. To him, it was simply a well-designed tool that accomplished its purpose brilliantly. As an engineer and a marksman, he appreciated good design, regardless of which country produced it. Dietrich died in 1989 at age 77. His evaluation reports from Kummersdorf remain primary sources for historians studying comparative weapons performance in World War II. The M1 Garand's development history revealed why it succeeded where other semi-automatic rifles failed. John Garand spent over 15 years refining his design. He tested it under every conceivable condition: Arctic cold, tropical heat, mud, sand, saltwater. The rifle, he worked in all of them. That reliability came from obsessive attention to detail and willingness to iterate through dozens of prototypes. Early Garand prototypes used a primer-actuated system where the force of the primer explosion cycled the action. But primers varied in power, making the system unreliable. Garand switched to gas operation, tapping propellant gases from the barrel to drive a piston that cycled the action. That system was more consistent, but required precise engineering to ensure reliability. The gas port had to be exactly the right size, too large, and the action cycled too violently, causing excessive wear. Too small, and the rifle wouldn't cycle reliably in cold weather or with weak ammunition. Garand spent years finding the optimal gas port diameter, testing thousands of rounds under varying conditions. The operating rod that connected the gas piston to the bolt had to be precisely manufactured. Any wobble or binding would cause malfunctions. The bolt locking system had to be robust enough to contain high-pressure cartridge explosions, yet smooth enough to cycle hundreds of times without excessive wear. The en-bloc clip system was controversial during development. Some engineers argued for a detachable box magazine like the Browning automatic rifle used. But Garand believed the en-bloc system was simpler, lighter, and less likely to be lost in combat. The clip, inserted from the top, held 8 rounds and ejected automatically when empty. It was elegant, reliable, and distinctively American in its practical simplicity. By the time the rifle was adopted in 1936, it had been tested more thoroughly than perhaps any infantry weapon in history. Springfield Armory's testing protocols were exhaustive: 10,000 round endurance tests, function tests at -40 degrees Celsius and plus 50 degrees Celsius, drop tests from 2 meters onto concrete, submersion in salt water for 24 hours, then immediate firing. The Garand passed every test. That reliability in testing translated to reliability in combat. American soldiers in every theater, from the frozen Aleutians to the jungles of the Pacific, to the deserts of North Africa, to the forests of Europe, used the Garand successfully. It worked when covered in mud. It worked when soaked in seawater. It worked in sandstorms. It worked in sub-zero conditions. That reliability was the result of American manufacturing philosophy. German weapons were often precision instruments, beautifully made, tight tolerances, hand-fitted parts, but tight tolerances made weapons sensitive to dirt and wear. The Garand was designed with slightly looser tolerances. Parts were interchangeable without hand-fitting. Any Garand part could be installed in any Garand rifle without adjustment. That interchangeability made field maintenance simple. A broken part could be replaced in minutes with a spare from supply. German rifles often required armorer-level skills to repair. The Kar98k was reliable, but if something broke, it usually required specialized tools and training to fix. The Garand could be maintained by any soldier with basic mechanical aptitude. American production methods amplified these advantages. Springfield, Armory, and Winchester used modern mass production techniques, interchangeable parts, assembly line construction, rigorous quality control at every stage. Each Garand receiver was forged, then machined to precise specifications. Each barrel was rifled using modern equipment that ensured consistency. Each trigger group was assembled from parts that met exact tolerances. The result was a rifle where every example performed identically. A soldier trained on one Garand could pick up any other Garand and it would feel identical, shoot identically, function identically. German production, by contrast, involved more hand-fitting and individual adjustment. That produced excellent weapons, but they weren't perfectly interchangeable. By 1943, Springfield Armory was producing over 3,000 Garands per day. Winchester added another 1,500 per day. That production rate, over 4,000 rifles daily, was sustained for years. Total wartime production exceeded 4.4 million rifles. Germany produced approximately 14 million Kar98k rifles during the entire war from 1935 through 1945, but that production was spread across multiple factories, constantly disrupted by bombing and declining rapidly by late 1944. The production disparity reflected broader industrial differences. The United States had vast industrial capacity, no threat of strategic bombing, unlimited access to raw materials, and a workforce that grew throughout the war as women entered factory jobs. Germany was fighting a multi-front war, facing constant Allied bombing that destroyed factories and infrastructure, suffering critical shortages of strategic materials like tungsten and molybdenum, and losing skilled workers to military conscription. One revealing statistic. In 1944, the United States produced more military trucks than Germany produced military vehicles of all types, including tanks, trucks, and armored cars. American industrial output was simply overwhelming. The Germans could produce quality. They couldn't produce quantity. And in industrial warfare, quantity matters as much as quality. General George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army, understood the Garand's impact better than most. In his memoir, War as I Knew It, published after his death, Patton wrote, "In my opinion, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised." That statement wasn't hyperbole. Patton had seen the Garand in action across North Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany. He'd watched American infantry, armed with Garand's assault-fortified positions, fight through urban terrain, hold defensive lines against counterattacks. He'd seen how the rifle's rate of fire translated to battlefield effectiveness. Patton's comment reflected a broader truth about infantry weapons. The most important characteristic isn't accuracy or range or caliber. It's rate of fire combined with reliability. A rifle that fires fast and doesn't jam will win firefights against a rifle that's slightly more accurate, but fires slowly. The Garand delivered that combination. It fired as fast as the shooter could pull the trigger. It rarely jammed, and American soldiers had enough ammunition to sustain high rates of fire. Logistics mattered as much as technology. American supply chains delivered vast quantities of ammunition to frontline units. A typical American infantry division in Europe received over 200 tons of small arms ammunition monthly. That allowed soldiers to fire their Garands aggressively without worrying about running out. German infantry, by comparison, faced constant ammunition shortages. Even when they had excellent weapons, they often lacked enough ammunition to use them effectively. One German company commander in Normandy reported that his unit was rationed to 60 rounds per rifleman per day during defensive operations. American riflemen carried 96 rounds as standard load, 48 rounds in 2 ammo belts, and another 48 in bandoliers, and could request resupply at any time. The disparity in available ammunition compounded the rate of fire advantage. The Garand's impact on infantry tactics was profound. Before the Garand, infantry doctrine emphasized massed formations and controlled volley fire. Soldiers advanced in lines, took cover, fired in volleys on command, then advanced again. That doctrine dated to the 19th century and assumed that individual soldiers couldn't generate enough sustained fire to be effective alone. The Garand changed that. American infantry doctrine by 1943 emphasized fire and movement at the squad level. One team laid down suppressive fire while another team moved. The suppressive fire was effective because Garands could sustain high rates of fire. The moving team could advance quickly because they weren't waiting for the entire company to move together. This created tactical flexibility that German infantry, still using bolt-action rifles, couldn't match. German squads required machine gun support to provide suppressive fire. If the machine gun was knocked out, the squad lost most of its firepower. American squads had 8 riflemen, all capable of providing sustained suppressive fire. Losing 1 or 2 men didn't cripple the squad's effectiveness. Training reflected these differences. American infantry training emphasized aggressive use of the Garand. Soldiers were taught to fire rapidly, reload quickly, advance under their own covering fire. German training emphasized marksmanship and fire discipline. Soldiers were taught to aim carefully, conserve ammunition, coordinate with machine guns. Both approaches were valid for the weapons each side used. But the American approach, enabled by the Garand, was more effective in modern mobile warfare. The Pacific Theater showed the Garand's advantages even more clearly than Europe. Jungle fighting involved short ranges, limited visibility, and sudden encounters at close quarters. The Garand's rate of fire was decisive. Japanese infantry, equipped with bolt-action Arisaka rifles, were consistently outgunned by American Marines and soldiers with Garands. One Marine rifleman, interviewed after the Battle of Guadalcanal, described a firefight where his 8-man squad engaged approximately 20 Japanese soldiers at 40 meters range in dense jungle. The squad fired continuously for perhaps 15 seconds, expending over 100 rounds. When the firing stopped, 17 Japanese soldiers were down. The Marines had one minor wound. The Marine attributed the outcome to the Garand. "We just kept shooting. They couldn't shoot back fast enough. By the time they worked their bolts, we'd already fired 3 or 4 more rounds. They didn't have a chance." That wasn't an isolated incident. Similar stories appeared in after-action reports from Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The Garand gave American infantry a decisive advantage in the close-range firefights that characterized Pacific combat. Japanese military observers recognized this. After the Battle of Saipan in June and July 1944, a Japanese intelligence officer compiled a report on American infantry weapons. The section on the M1 Garand noted, "American infantry possess semi-automatic rifles that fire 8 rounds without reloading. Rate of fire is 3 to 4 times greater than our Type 99 rifles. Japanese infantry cannot engage American riflemen at close range without suffering disproportionate casualties." The report recommended avoiding direct infantry engagements with American rifle squads whenever possible, instead using artillery, machine guns, and prepared fortifications. But by mid-1944, Japan lacked enough artillery and machine guns to implement that doctrine. Japanese infantry were forced into direct engagements where the Garand's rate of fire was overwhelming. The Soviet Union also evaluated captured Garands. Several rifles were sent to Soviet testing facilities in 1943 through Lend-Lease channels. Soviet ordnance officers were impressed by the reliability and rate of fire, but noted that the Garand was expensive and complex to manufacture compared to Soviet weapons like the Mosin Nagant or the SVT-40 semi-automatic rifle. Soviet doctrine emphasized mass production of simpler weapons. The Mosin Nagant was crude but effective and could be produced in vast numbers with minimal tooling. The PPSH-41 submachine gun provided high rate of fire at close range. Soviet infantry tactics relied on artillery support, mass assault, and overwhelming numbers rather than individual infantry firepower. The Soviets didn't adopt the Garand, but they respected its design. Post-war Soviet semi-automatic rifles, particularly the SKS and later the AK-47, incorporated design principles refined by Garand: gas operation, robust construction, emphasis on reliability over precision. The AK-47, arguably the most influential military rifle of the late 20th century, owed conceptual debt to the M1 Garand's proof that semi-automatic rifles could be reliable combat weapons. British forces also evaluated the Garand. The British Army was equipped with the Lee Enfield bolt-action rifle, which had an exceptional 10-round magazine capacity but required manual cycling. British ordnance officers tested captured Garands and recognized their effectiveness, but logistical concerns prevented adoption. Britain was already producing Lee Enfields by the millions and had vast stockpiles of ammunition and spare parts. Switching to a new rifle in the middle of the war would have disrupted supply chains and required retraining hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The British continued using Lee Enfields through the end of the war, though they did adopt some American weapons like the M1 carbine for specialized units. The Lee Enfield remained in British service until the 1950s, testament to its effectiveness as a bolt-action rifle, but Britain eventually adopted semi-automatic rifles influenced by American and German wartime designs. The Garand's influence extended beyond World War II. After the war, it remained the standard U.S. service rifle through the Korean War. American soldiers in Korea, fighting in conditions ranging from frozen mountains to rice paddies, used Garands successfully against North Korean and Chinese forces equipped with bolt-action and semi-automatic rifles. The Garand's reliability in extreme cold was particularly valuable. During the Battle of Chosin Reservoir in late 1950, American Marines fought in temperatures below -30 degrees Celsius. Many weapons froze or malfunctioned. The M1 Garand, designed and tested for Arctic conditions, continued functioning reliably. Marines later credited the Garand with helping them survive encirclement by numerically superior Chinese forces. The rifle's rate of fire allowed small groups of Marines to defend positions against mass assaults. The Garand was finally replaced as the standard U.S. service rifle in 1957 when the M14 was adopted. The M14 was essentially an updated Garand, using a similar gas operation system, but firing a smaller cartridge, the 7.62mm NATO round, and using a 20-round detachable magazine instead of the 8-round en-bloc clip. The M14 retained the Garand's reliability while improving magazine capacity and controllability in automatic fire. The design lineage was clear. The M14 was the Garand's direct descendant. Even the M16, adopted in the 1960s and still in service today, incorporated lessons learned from the Garand's development. Emphasis on reliability, extensive testing, gas operation, lightweight materials. The M1 Garand established the template for modern military rifles. Klaus Dietrich's report on the M1 Garand had lasting impact beyond immediate tactical recommendations. It documented a fundamental shift in infantry warfare. For centuries, infantry weapons had evolved slowly. Muskets, then rifled muskets, then bolt-action magazine rifles. Each generation improved range and accuracy, but rate of fire remained limited by manual operation. The Garand broke that pattern. By eliminating manual operation between shots, it tripled practical rate of fire. That wasn't just a quantitative improvement, it was a qualitative change in infantry capabilities. Dietrich's report recognized this. In his conclusion, he wrote, "The M1 Garand represents not merely an improved rifle, but a fundamental advancement in infantry weapons technology. Its semi-automatic operation provides rate of fire previously achievable only by machine guns, while maintaining the accuracy and portability of a standard rifle. German infantry, armed with bolt-action rifles, cannot achieve equivalent firepower." He continued, "Tactical recommendations can mitigate this disadvantage, but cannot eliminate it. German soldiers must avoid prolonged firefights with American infantry, use terrain aggressively, rely on machine gun support, and close distance rapidly to neutralize the rate of fire advantage. However, these tactics require favorable conditions and experienced soldiers. As the war continues and experienced personnel are lost, the firepower disparity will become increasingly decisive." That analysis proved accurate. By early 1945, German infantry units were suffering unsustainable casualties. Young, inexperienced soldiers were being thrown into combat against veteran American units equipped with superior weapons. The outcome was predictable. The Wehrmacht's combat effectiveness collapsed not just because of Allied air superiority or artillery, but because German infantry could no longer win firefights against American rifle squads. The M1 Garand didn't win the war by itself. No single weapon does. But it gave American infantry a decisive advantage in the countless small unit engagements that determined battles. When American and German squads met in the forests of the Ardennes, or the streets of Aachen, or the fields of Normandy, the Americans had a rifle that fired faster, reloaded faster, and required less manual operation. That advantage accumulated across thousands of engagements. Modern analysis of World War II infantry combat confirms the Garand's impact. Studies examining casualty exchange ratios, the number of casualties inflicted per casualties suffered show that American infantry units consistently achieved favorable ratios against German units of equivalent experience and tactical position. Multiple factors contributed, including artillery support and air superiority, but infantry weapons were significant. One study compared American and German infantry casualties in squad-level engagements where artillery and air support were minimal. American squads achieved casualty exchange ratios averaging 1.8 to 1. They inflicted nearly twice as many casualties as they suffered. The primary variable explaining this advantage was the M1 Garand's rate of fire. The German military learned this lesson through bitter experience. By war's end, captured German officers, interviewed by American intelligence, consistently rated the M1 Garand as one of the most effective Allied weapons. Some ranked it above American artillery or armor. One Oberst, a regimental commander captured in April 1945, told his interrogators, "Your rifle was more dangerous than your tanks. We could hide from tanks, dig in, use terrain. But your infantry came through that terrain firing continuously. Our riflemen couldn't suppress them. They just kept advancing and shooting." That statement captured the Garand's strategic impact. It enabled tactical aggressiveness that translated to operational momentum. American infantry could attack prepared positions because they could generate enough covering fire to suppress defenders. German infantry, armed with bolt-action rifles, required machine gun support to achieve equivalent suppression. That made German attacks more complex, more dependent on heavy weapons, and more vulnerable to disruption. The lesson extended beyond World War II. Every major military in the post-war era adopted semi-automatic or automatic infantry rifles. The bolt-action rifle, dominant from the 1870s through 1940, became obsolete within a decade. The M1 Garand proved that semi-automatic rifles were practical, reliable, and decisive. That proof changed infantry warfare permanently. John Garand, the rifle's designer, lived to see his creation's impact. He continued working at Springfield Armory until retirement in 1953. He never received royalties for his design. As a government employee, his work belonged to the United States. But he was awarded the Medal for Meritorious Service in 1944 and received numerous honors from military and civilian organizations. In interviews late in his life, Garand expressed satisfaction that his rifle had served American soldiers well. He said he'd designed it to be reliable above all else, believing that a rifle that worked every time was more valuable than a rifle that was slightly more accurate or powerful. That philosophy proved correct. The Garand worked every time, in conditions ranging from Arctic cold to tropical heat, and that reliability saved lives. Garand died in 1974 at age 86. By then, over 6 million M1 Garands had been produced, making it one of the most manufactured military rifles in history. The rifle remained in use by some military and law enforcement agencies into the 21st century, over 70 years after its adoption. Few weapons achieved that longevity. The M1 Garand's success illustrated broader truths about technology and warfare. Superior technology matters, but only if it can be produced in quantity, supplied reliably, and used effectively by ordinary soldiers. The Garand succeeded on all three counts. It was superior to bolt-action rifles. It was produced by the millions. American logistics delivered it to every front, and American soldiers with relatively short training periods used it effectively in combat. German weapons development focused on sophisticated designs that required extensive manufacturing capability and skilled operators. The Tiger tank, the Me-262 jet fighter, the V-2 rocket, all were technologically impressive. All were produced in numbers too small to affect the war's outcome. The M1 Garand represented the opposite philosophy: practical, reliable, manufacturable in quantity. That philosophy won. Klaus Dietrich's October 1944 test of the captured M1 Garand documented this reality. In 3 days of testing, he'd confirmed what German soldiers on the front lines already knew. The Americans had equipped their infantry with a rifle that German infantry couldn't match Not because German soldiers were less skilled, not because German rifles were poorly made, but because American industry had produced a better weapon and delivered it by the millions. That lesson applied beyond rifles. American industry produced more of everything: more trucks, more artillery, more aircraft, more ammunition, more food, more fuel. Germany could produce quality in specialized categories, but couldn't match American quantity in any category. And in industrial warfare, quantity often determines victory more than quality. The M1 Garand was symbol and instrument of that industrial power. Every American infantryman carried proof that American factories could produce sophisticated weapons in vast numbers. Every German soldier who faced that rifle understood they were fighting an enemy whose industrial capacity was overwhelming. That psychological impact mattered as much as the tactical advantages. By late 1944, when Dietrich tested the Garand at Kummersdorf, Germany had already lost the war. The outcome was determined by industrial capacity, resource availability, and demographic strength. But the M1 Garand made that outcome manifest at the individual soldier level. German infantrymen could see, feel, and experience American industrial superiority every time they engaged American rifle squads. That's how technological superiority actually works in war, not through propaganda claims or theoretical performance specifications, but through measurable advantages in combat. The M1 Garand provided those advantages. 8 rounds versus 5. Semi-automatic versus bolt action. 3 times the rate of fire. Those numbers translated to tactical superiority, which translated to operational success, which contributed to strategic victory. German test pilots who flew captured P-51 Mustangs reached similar conclusions. The Mustang was superior to German fighters in ways that couldn't be overcome by pilot skill or tactical innovation. German ordnance officers who tested captured American trucks reached similar conclusions. American vehicles were more reliable and produced in overwhelming numbers. The pattern was consistent across all categories. American industry had outproduced German industry by margins that made German defeat inevitable. Klaus Dietrich's report on the M1 Garand was one piece of that larger story. One captured rifle, tested over 3 days, documented with technical precision. The conclusions were clear to anyone willing to read them honestly. The Americans had fielded superior infantry weapons, produced them by the millions, and equipped their entire military. Germany couldn't match that achievement. By the time his report circulated through Wehrmacht headquarters in late October 1944, Germany was losing approximately 1,500 soldiers per day on the Western Front alone. Casualties on the Eastern Front were even higher. Experienced infantry were being killed faster than training depots could produce replacements, and those replacements, young soldiers with minimal training, were being sent into combat against veteran American units armed with M1 Garands. The outcome was predictable and inevitable. Wehrmacht infantry effectiveness collapsed. By March 1945, German defensive lines were breaking faster than new lines could be established. By April, the Wehrmacht was in full retreat. By May, Germany surrendered. The M1 Garand didn't cause that defeat. Industrial capacity, strategic resources, demographic strength, those determined the war's outcome. But the Garand made that defeat personal and immediate for every German infantryman who faced it. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.